First up, a brief warning. This episode may be deemed offensive to those with strong Christian faith. Also, this episode does involve some adult themes, so if you feel you might be offended, please switch over to one of our other episodes. Okay, with that disclaimer in mind, let's move on and take a look at the top 10 most evil popes in history. We will be looking at the popes reigning from the Dark Ages through to the Renaissance period for the purposes of this show. So, here we go.
Things ain't like they used to be. Used to be if we had big questions, there was places we could go and get our questions answered. But things done changed now. If you want to know some answers, you got to find them out yourself. I don't know if y'all been to church recently, but church is not answering any questions about anything at this particular time. I ain't talking about white church. I ain't talking about black church. I'm talking about church. Church as official has said you can feel free to come in and praise and worship all you like. But if you have any questions for Jesus, you should ask him in the parking lot on the way to your house.
As Christianity eventually flourished and spread throughout the Western world, things became complicated. As the faith's popularity rose, so did the power vested in those who sat in the papal seat. Nowadays, we view the Pope as one who guides by example, leading a simple, ethical, and moral life. Yet, over the 2,000 years of the Vatican's existence, not all popes have been so highly praised as our current Pope Francis. Some have been greedy, vicious, and downright evil. Some have even been murderers and rapists. With power often comes greed and corruption, and the history of the papacy is splattered with more blood and bodily fluids than an episode of Game of Thrones. Stephen VI was Pope from 896 to his death in 897. Bizarrely, when he rose to power, he had the body of a previous Pope, Formosus, dug up and put on trial. The dead body was provided with the necessary legal representation in the form of a deacon who spoke in defense of the departed Formosus. The rotting corpse was found guilty. Following the verdict, the decaying body was then dragged through the town, stripped of its sacred vestments, beheaded, buried, dug up for the second time, and just for good measure, thrown in the river Tiber. Exactly why Pope Stephen VI despised Formosus to the extent he had his dead body put on trial and tortured seems sadly lost in history. But it seems Stephen VI had a habit of making enemies. Pope Stephen VI lasted no longer than a year. He was strangled to death that summer by one of his foes. This enemy, we assume, was alive. Stephen VI takes the 7th spot on our list for digging up and putting a corpse on trial. Well done, Stephen. Congratulations. John XII was the head of the Catholic Church from 955 to his death in 964. He came from a powerful Roman family that had dominated the papacy politically for over 50 years. John XII didn't have a good reputation, quite the opposite. He was infamous for his alleged depravity and the wayward manner in which he conducted himself. He became pope between the age of 18 and 25, and it has been said in numerous reports that he swiftly set about raping and generally engaging in sexually deviant behavior from the moment he rose to power, selling off ecclesiastical lands to fund his immoral lifestyle. Pope John XII was eventually killed by a jealous husband who found the Pope in bed with his wife. This Pope finds himself at number 4 on our list for his sexual deviant behavior and general irresponsibility. Well done, John. Benedict IX was the youngest of all the popes, with reports that he was as young as 12 when he took the papal seat, although official records state that Benedict was 20 years old. He was nephew to the previous 2 popes and described in the Catholic Encyclopedia as a disgrace to the chair of Peter. Pope Victor III said, "His life was so vile, so foul, and so execrable that I shudder to think of it." The young pope hosted all-male orgies and raped men, women, children, and even, some claim, animals. He eventually sold the papacy to Gregory VI, who was to be more of a stable religious figure. Following Gregory VI's rule, Damasus II was named as the next pope. This didn't sit well with Benedict, who had Damasus poisoned and reclaimed the papacy for himself. There he remained until his crimes were so immoral and terrible that the Romans could no longer stand the figurehead. They drove him out of Rome. In another strange twist, Benedict was reinstated for a 3rd time despite his horrendous reputation. For these and other sins, Benedict claims the top spot in our evil pope list. Urban II ruled from 1088 to 1099 and was a native of France. He is best known for having initiated the First Crusade and setting up the Roman Curia, a royal ecclesiastical court. The Pope promised forgiveness to all those who joined the crusade when he decreed, "All who die by the way, whether by land or by sea, or in battle against the pagans, shall have immediate remission of sins. This I grant through the power of God with which I am invested." This clever command gave every murderer, rapist, and thief a shot at entering heaven. It also raised, or lowered, depending on your point of view, the standards in the methods of manipulation one might use to raise an army. For that reason, Pope Urban II is number 10 on our list.
Pope Urban II orders the First Crusade, November 27, 1095. In November 1095, the Pope Urban II held a speech at the Council of Clermont, calling for a war of liberation. The war was to be waged by volunteers who vowed to fight, by calling all Christians to war against the Muslims to defend the Byzantine Empire and potentially reclaim the Holy Land. He gave rise to the Crusades. During the Church Council at Piacenza in northern Italy in the first week of March that year, an ambassador of the Byzantine Emperor, Alexius I, asked for help against the Turks. Their advance across Asia Minor was increasing, and it had brought them within striking distance of Constantinople. The area we now refer to as the Middle East was a point of conflict for the Christians, who made pilgrimages to Jerusalem. However, the Seljuk Turks would now attack those making the arduous journey, and when the Turks took the Holy City, the Christians were barred from entering it. And now the Turks threatened to invade the Byzantine Empire and potentially take Constantinople. Therefore, Alexios and Urban II called upon the Crusaders to retake the lost Byzantine territory, to protect the Holy Land. It was not the first appeal of this kind, but for the Pope, it came at an important time. For quite some time, the papacy had been worried about the disintegration of Christendom's eastern frontier. The Pope's response upon hearing this news from the ambassador was not spontaneous. His predecessor, Pope Gregory VII, had already received the news of the Turkish penetration in 1074 and had proposed to personally lead a force of 50,000 volunteers to liberate the Eastern Christian brothers. He argued that with an army this big, they might even push onto the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. But it never came this far while Gregory was still Pope. The Schism of 1054 had divided Christendom into 2 separate branches, a Western Latin branch and an Eastern Greek one. From the beginning of his pontificate, Pope Urban II had been in touch with the Byzantine Emperor, with the aim of improving the relations between the Latin and Greek churches. The call for aid from the Byzantine Emperor provided an amazing opportunity for the Pope. While fighting to take back the Holy Land, he might even be able to quietly unite Christian Europe under papal control once more. The Pope called for the Council of Clermont in France and held his speech, in which he aimed to gain the necessary support for the expensive and extreme expedition. Once the Byzantine Empire was secure, the Christian lands were to be freed from Muslim control. He portrayed the Seljuk Turks as heretical, as barbaric savages, and as the enemies of the true followers of Christ. Many crimes were noted against the Christians in the East, all to inflame the Christians with anger and so that they would feel inspired to join the fight against the Muslims. Because this is what Christ had commanded, and so they obeyed.
Urban rose and made the sign of the cross with his right hand. All present kneeled as he reverently said the Pater Noster, and stood as he raised both hands to shoulder height, palms upward. He turned to the bishop and grimaced. The richly robed cleric stepped forward and took the heavy crown and replaced it with a mitre covered with embroidered cloth of gold. The Pope took his place at the lectern at the front of the dais, warming to the audience with self-deprecating anecdote. His style of speech was pleasing and disarming, yet powerful, and could be heard by all. He surveyed the crowd, giving extra scrutiny to the high-ranking nobleman who stood in the first ranks, and began his address. Most beloved brethren, I, Urban, by the permission of God, chief bishop and prelate of the whole world, would extend our own welcome and blessing to all of you. Applause and cheers followed, and the Pope raised a hand for quiet. I have been urged by necessity to come here as God's ambassador with a message most urgent for all Christians, but would first speak a divine admonition to you, his servants. The crowd fell to silence as the Pope continued. Noblemen, God has put you as stewards over his family to minister to it. But if you fall careless or negligent in your duty, and wolves carry away your sheep, you will surely lose the reward laid up for you by God. First, correct yourselves and become free from blame, that you may be able to correct those who are subject to you. If you wish to be the friends of God, gladly do these things that you know will please him. Let matters that pertain to the church be governed by the laws thereof, and its clergy be free from secular power. But see that church offices not be bought or sold, and that the tithes that belong to God be faithfully paid. Any man who seizes a bishop or clergyman, monks or nuns or pilgrims or their servants, punish him as an outlaw. For if a man who does not give part of his goods as alms is punished with the damnation of hell, how should he be punished who robs another of his goods? The noblemen glanced at each other, nodding agreement, and looked satisfied. Urban swept a rigid forefinger over them and spoke again sharply. The high noblemen, who had but a few minutes earlier looked at their fellows in complacence, now cast round with fearful faces, knowing that the Pope had seen into their hearts. A discussion amongst them ensued, and before too long a time had passed, the greatest among them, a mighty count, knelt before the dais. Your Holiness, we give thanks to God that you have seen fit to reveal our grievous shortcomings. We would make repentance and a faithful promise that all not of justice will be brought to such in our domains, and that truce be kept on penalty of our souls. Urban looked at him sternly. Do you now promise, and by God's grace, your mistakes will be forgiven? After Urban had heard and made judgment on other matters of faith and law, he again took the lectern.
Just like his predecessor, he used the argument of the possibility of saving Jerusalem. Some versions mention Jerusalem as the ultimate goal, and some do not. Therefore, it isn't clear how important Jerusalem was as an objective to Urban. His letters suggested that it wasn't the ultimate goal, and this is backed up by Fulcher de Chartres, the most prominent source that we have from Clermont. Fulcher, who was an eyewitness present at the council, focused more on the message of freeing the Eastern churches, in accordance with Byzantine wishes. The other sources place much more emphasis on capturing Jerusalem. Urban II would go on a preaching tour throughout France, and many priests and monks spread his message, including such figures as Peter the Hermit, who gained a large following of extremely pious peasants, and minor knights, who formed the first wave to go to the Holy Land, forming the Peasants' Crusade. Tens of thousands answered the call in 1096 and went on the First Crusade to find salvation while fighting for God. They took a vow and the sign of the cross, which defined the gesture of crusading. This was a textile cross that was sewn onto their clothes. Even though Urban II tried to persuade the old, women, monks, and the sick not to take the pilgrimage, it was impossible. The enthusiasm was so great that it was not just knights that answered the call, but great numbers of those incapable of combat and with no soldierly skill or intent. Those that answered the call, according to Urban II, would get a remission of their sins, or in other words, a ticket directly into heaven. Europe was violent with knights fighting each other, and Urban II had warned them that they could go to hell for this. The knights of Europe were well versed in violence, and indeed excelled at it. The European peace established under Charlemagne's empire had shattered, as his successors couldn't hold the different kingdoms together, and individual lords became more powerful. Managing to export the violence in Europe was appealing to Urban, as it would allow him to focus on reinstating papal primacy over all of Christendom. As well as this, soldiers were motivated by other factors. Some were motivated by the prospect of material riches and rewards in the land of milk and honey that Urban described. However, the risk was that the Crusaders had to sell their possessions and homes to raise the necessary money for the journey in the first place. Others were appalled by the tales of barbaric atrocities that the pagans had conducted. However, for most it was a personal piety that drove them to set out to free the Holy Land, and they were enticed by the prospect of the forgiveness of their sins. After 3 years of crusading, the Christians could celebrate as they took Jerusalem. The First Crusade was a success and led to the establishment of the 4 Crusader states: the County of Edessa, Principality of Antioch, Kingdom of Jerusalem, and the County of Tripoli. But before the news of the Christian victory could reach Europe, Pope Urban II had died.
Boniface VIII was born Benedetto Caetani and was pope from 1294 to his death in 1303. He held the first Jubilee year in Rome and declared both spiritual and temporal powers were under the people's jurisdiction. Kings, he claimed, were beneath the power of the Roman pontiff. Boniface VIII waged wars, sacked cities, and generally collected as much cash as humanly possible. Boniface even appears in Dante's Divine Comedy. The author places Boniface in the 8th circle of hell for the crime of selling off ecclesiastical privileges. 16th century French author François Rabelais also wrote Boniface into hell in his work Gargantua and Pantagruel. He pictures the evil pope skimming scum from soup bowls. He makes it into our list of evil popes at the reasonably devilish number 3, with extra points for making it into the pages of 2 major works of literature. Pope Urban VI was pope from 1378 to his death in 1389. He is the last pope to be elected from outside the College of Cardinals, and his reign was marked with tense conflicts between rival factions. Not unknown to have the odd temper tantrum, this pope, in a fit of paranoia, had 6 cardinals arrested, brutally tortured, and executed. After the ordeal, he complained that the screams of the cardinals were not loud enough. Whether there was ever a plot against him is unclear. What is clear is that he reigned with an iron fist. This pope claims the 2nd spot for murdering and torturing 6 holy men without any remorse. This evil pope may well have been what we nowadays label a psychopath belonging in a clinical institution rather than a position of holy power. Pope Alexander VI was born Rodrigo de Borja. This Spaniard was pope from 1492 until his death in 1503 and was well known for his libertine attitude. His rich merchant family bought Alexander the Post. He is certainly the most controversial of the Renaissance popes, partly owing to the fact that he admitted fathering several children from his various mistresses. Alexander was said to be gifted with the quality of being a smooth talker and of choice eloquence. Beautiful women were attracted to him and excited by him in a remarkable way, more strongly than how iron is drawn to a magnet. He hosted the most lavish orgies that the Vatican had ever known. As many as 50 prostitutes entertained in one session, with clergymen hired to act as both participants and voyeurs to the event. He kept count of the number of times his entourage sinned at these soirees. Rumor has it he slept with his daughter before marrying her off to rich merchants. He then declared the marriage void, being pope he could do such things, and took her back. His bloated corpse led to suspicions that the Pope had been poisoned by his son, Caesar, although other sources claim the Pope's death was due to malaria, then prevalent in Rome. While this Pope may not be Beelzebub incarnate, he did have a ferocious appetite for the forbidden fruit, and that plants him firmly at number 6. Pope Leo X was the son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, the ruler of the Florentine Republic. He reigned as pope from 1513 to 1521 and is probably best remembered for his patronage of the arts. He was loose with the cash and winded up selling a kind of ecclesiastical insurance policy that guaranteed relief from damnation following the death of the donator. He borrowed and spent money without much in the way of circumspection, claiming, "Since God has given us papacy, let us enjoy it." He has earned his place at number 9 in our gallery of rogues for selling divine privileges for cold hard cash, which if you think about it, is seriously immoral, if not totally evil. Pope Paul III came to the papal throne following the 1527 sack of Rome. He had allegedly murdered both his mother and his niece as a means to inherit the family's wealth prior to becoming pope. He was also known to eliminate antagonists by strangulation. Those who crossed him did so carefully. The famed love of his life was his daughter Constanza Farnese, but quite how close their relationship was, we couldn't say. On the one hand, he was strictly against corruption, but on the other hand, he taxed Rome's prostitutes. He was a man of many hats and a great patron of the arts. Michelangelo's Last Judgment was produced in the Sistine Chapel during his reign. Paul also commissioned Michelangelo to paint the crucifixion of St. Peter and the conversion of St. Paul. So while Paul earns evil points for perhaps killing his family members, having an alleged incestuous relationship with his daughter, and having his enemies strangled, he loses evil points for his patronage to the arts and sits in the 5th spot of our evil popes list. Pope Julius III began to reign in 1550 until his death in 1555. At first, he seemed like a good choice. He had good ideas in modernizing the church and pushed through motions to reform the ecclesiastical status quo. But after a brief flurry of official activity, Julius sought out more pleasurable activities. He became fond of a teenage boy he had discovered on the streets of Rome, whom he took into the Vatican as his lover and adopted nephew. He promoted the youngster, named Innocenzo Chiocci del Monte, to cardinal while he was still a kid, and naturally, tongues began to wag within the Vatican. He asked artist Michelangelo to decorate his home with figurines of adolescent boys indulging in various forms of sexual engagement. While not strictly evil, Julius III was certainly a bit creepy and outrageously scandalous for the period. He sits proudly at number 8 on our list.
Berlin is the scene of a wedding which is immensely popular in Germany. After a civil ceremony, General Goering, Premier of Prussia, drives with his bride, Frau Emma Sonnemann, the famous opera singer, to the cathedral. The bride enters alone. She is followed by Germany's best man, Hitler, who on this occasion literally is best man to the general. As the couple leave the cathedral, they are greeted by the roar of tens of thousands of Germans amid scenes of amazing and unprecedented enthusiasm, which recall the pomp of the old imperial regime. They drive away on their honeymoon through streets lined with 33,000 soldiers and Nazi stormtroopers. signal. And there it is, a puff of smoke in the far corner, above the tall pipe-like chimney of the Sistine Chapel, to proclaim that a new pope has been elected. Then all eyes turn to the great balcony of St. Peter's, where the first cardinal deacon announces in Latin that Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli has chosen the name of Pius. And as dusk turns into darkness, the tall, slim figure of Pius XII on his 63rd birthday. Since he was first ordained 49 years ago, Eugenio Pacelli was trained as a statesman and diplomat of the Church. As Papal Secretary of State, he has carried out great missions abroad, as when he visits France for the celebration of the Holy Year. During the Great War, as nuncio in Germany, he was often a go-between among warring nations. Twice he has crossed the Atlantic and has met President Roosevelt. His election as Pope with unprecedented speed.
In the Basilica of St. Peter's, Vatican City, the spiritual leader of nearly a fifth of the world, Pope Pius XII, celebrates the 17th anniversary of his coronation. Among the thousands in the Great Basilica are the 45 missions from abroad, the diplomatic corps, representatives of the various Catholic orders, and bishops and archbishops from many parts of the world. Normally, the anniversary is celebrated on a smaller scale in the Sistine Chapel, but this is a special occasion because it is the first time in 3 years the Pope's health has permitted him to be present, and also because it follows the celebration of his 80th birthday. The ceremony over, the cardinals and other prelates rise to follow the papal throne from the church, which bears the name of St. Peter. The Papal Guard is on parade for the arrival of Prince Rainier and Princess Grace of Monaco, who are paying an official visit to Pope Pius XII. When His Holiness grants audience to a head of state, even of such tiny a state as Monaco, the ceremonial is long and formal. On this occasion, it lasts more than 2 hours. Princess Grace wears the traditional black gown. On the prince's uniform is the Golden Spur, the oldest of all papal awards, bestowed on him this morning. At the end of the audience, the Pope gives his blessing to the royal couple. As they take their leave, the royal visitors hand to the Pope a gold medal specially minted by the French jeweler Cartier. They walk in procession through the palace, past the Switzers of the papal bodyguard, who salute one of the smallest but oldest of the Catholic states of the world. It is a very rare occurrence for Pope Pius XII to leave the Vatican, so thousands gather to watch when His Holiness visits the Capranica College, where he himself studied as a young seminarist more than 60 years ago. He returns, as head of the Catholic Church, to give his blessing to the celebration of the college's 5th centenary. The Pontiff visits many of the rooms where so long ago he prepared for a devoted career, which was ultimately to bring him to the throne of St. Peter. Dignitaries of church and state are present when Pope Pius XII hands to the college a beautiful miniature triptych of the crucifixion, a personal gift to the ancient foundation from one of the greatest of its sons.
This is Movie Time. Leslie Mitchell reporting. People all over the world, in every country, of every faith, join in mourning the untimely death of Pope John. He was universally respected and loved above all things for his humanity. Born of a humble peasant family, he rose to become Patriarch of Venice as Cardinal Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli. He was elected and crowned Pope in 1958, the first Pope to bear the name John for 600 years. At his coronation, he was 76 years of age. His many informal trips outside the Vatican underlined his reputation as the most accessible Pope of modern times. His humility and direct approach made ordinary people feel that he was their personal friend. A highlight of his brief reign was the convening of the Ecumenical Council, the first for nearly 100 years. It was also the first to be attended by representatives of other faiths. Largely due to his personal influence and efforts, this council has made the cause of Christian unity not only a possibility, but an accepted goal. Pope John thought the papal encyclical Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, which he signed in April, the most significant achievement of his reign. It was typical of him that it should be addressed to all men of goodwill and not only the Catholic faithful. He was everywhere acclaimed for the breadth of vision which he brought to the great issues of our time. Hopes of world peace are the poorer for his passing. Pope John started great things, but sadly has not lived to see them come to fulfillment.
Poi un altro segno dei tempi. Il 13 ottobre 1964 Montini fa dono ai poveri della tiara. La consegna a Spillman, arcivescovo di New York, che la espone nelle varie diocesi. Le offerte superano il $1.000.000. È il suo biglietto da visita per l'India.
The embalmed body of a pope who died 38 years ago, John the 23rd, in his sealed crystal coffin, lies at the altar of the chapel of St. Jerome in St. Peter's Basilica. Exhumed, he is honoured. He was known as Good Pope John. He was born in 1881 to an Italian family of sharecroppers in a small village in the Lombardy region. Brother of 13 siblings, Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli was ordained a priest at the age of 24. At an age of retirement, 72, he was made cardinal. Then in the conclave for Pius XII's successor, was surprised to be chosen pope at 76. He would ring in unexpected change. On the night he announced the Second Vatican Council to the people gathered in St. Peter's Square, he told them when they got home to their children to give them a kiss and tell them it's from the Pope. He was full of surprises. He got out more than his predecessors. He visited the sick, went to prisons, shook hands with heretics, Protestants, Orthodox, Anglicans, and broke with the teaching to beware of the Jews. He moved the church furniture around and took Latin down a peg in favor of regular language, or rather the Council did. The Second Vatican Council addressed relations between the Church and the modern world. It lasted for 3 years, starting late 1962. Throughout, the Vatican harbored 2,500 bishops who came from as far as Communist China. John invited Christians outside the Catholic Church to send observers. He said immutable doctrine must be studied afresh and reformulated in contemporary terms. Catholic faithful still argue about the reforms today. John died of stomach cancer in 1963 before the council was finished. But the merits of that gathering, along with a single miracle of a nun cured of illness when praying before his tomb, was cited as responsible for the decision to declare him a saint.
St. John the 23rd is leaving St. Peter's Basilica temporarily and returning to his homeland.
Siamo qui raccolti in preghiera per consegnare al Vescovo di Bergamo l'urna contenente le venerate spoglie di San Giovanni XXIII, che fanno ritorno nella terra delle sue origini e in particolare fanno ritorno sotto il monte, dove da bambino il futuro pontefice respirò la fede nell'esempio bello dei suoi genitori.
The remains of John the 23rd were in the Vatican grottos until he was beatified in 2001 and were later moved to one of the basilica's chapels. They now returned to Sotto il Monte until June 10th. Pope Francis gave his approval for the good Pope to be venerated by those unable to travel to Rome, especially the elderly, sick, and poor. Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli was born in Sotto il Monte, a small town in northern Italy, on November 25, 1881. With this solemn procession first thing in the morning, the body of St. John the 23rd was loaded into the vehicle that carried him on a roadway trip to his homeland. It's the second time the remains of a canonized pope have left St. Peter's Basilica. Previously, only those of St. Pio X had returned to Venice in 1959 at the request of then Pope John the 23rd himself.
I want to welcome Your Holiness to the United States. Oh. Well, now, I want to welcome Your Holiness to the United States, and on behalf of the American people, say how pleased and privileged we are to have you among us. We're just returning from a mission of peace, and I can think of no more fitting close to this journey than to be here in the presence of Your Holiness, who has worked so diligently for recognition of the rights and dignity of the individual and for peace among nations. I can assure you, Your Holiness, the American people seek to act as a force for peace in the world and to further the cause of human freedom and dignity. Indeed, an appreciation for the unalienable rights of every human being is the very concept that gave birth to this nation. Few have understood better than our nation's founding fathers that claims of human dignity transcend the claims of any government, and that this transcendent right itself has a transcendent source. Our Declaration of Independence 4 times acknowledges our country's dependence on a supreme being, and its principal author and one of our greatest presidents, Thomas Jefferson, put it simply: the God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. To us, Your Holiness, the Holy See and your pastorate represent one of humanity's greatest moral and spiritual forces, and your visit is particularly significant, coming as it does soon after the reestablishment of relations between the Holy See and the United States. For over a century, we maintained warm and fruitful but informal relations. Now we have exchanged ambassadors, and we hope to build on this new relationship to our mutual benefit and to the benefit of peace-loving people everywhere. I also want to say how grateful I am for this opportunity to meet personally with you to discuss matters of vital concern to the Holy See, and to the United States. We deeply value your counsel and support and express our solidarity with you. On behalf of the American people, I welcome you and I extend to you our warmest greetings.
Praised be Jesus Christ. Mr. President, dear people of Alaska, esteemed citizens of America, it gives me great pleasure to visit Alaska once again. God bless America.
Soon the smiling image of John Paul II will once again adorn St. Peter's Square. He will officially be recognized as a saint of the Church, making him an example for Catholics around the world. But in his 26-year pontificate, it can be easy to overlook some of the key points that marked his life and his papacy. So here are a few examples. Humanity. Karol Wojtyła was passionate about life and the arts. He loved poetry and drama, and in fact, he used to be an actor himself and wrote a play before he was ordained a priest. A key moment in his life was when he was employed in a chemical factory.
Questa esperienza di un operaio e nello stesso tempo di un seminarista clandestino mi è rimasta per tutta la vita. Nella fabbrica per fare il mio turno 8 ore di giorno o di notte. Ho portato con alcuni libri. I miei colleghi, vuol dire gli operai, si sono meravigliati un po', ma non scandalizzati.
He was a pope everybody felt close to. He loved to laugh and wasn't afraid to show it. He was also known for hugging people. He wasn't afraid. He was a man of deep faith who put his trust in God. He prepared for the priesthood at a clandestine seminary founded by the then Cardinal of Krakow. And because of the tense atmosphere, he was ordained in secret. He always challenged everyone to not be afraid of life's difficulties.
Non abbiate paura.
He never denied his health problems. In fact, he would even joke about them every now and then.
Come vedete, è un papa un po' deficiente, ma non ancora decaduto.
He underlined the importance of conscience instead of hatred, and this, he said, was the best way to counteract materialism. He chose understanding as a path towards democracy. The traveling pope. John Paul II was the pope and world leader who traveled the most in history. He visited 129 countries. He took on a total of 146 trips outside of Italy, which adds up to the equivalent of 3 times the distance between the Earth and the Moon. And during his journeys, he welcomed meetings with different types of people.
Los mineros, queremos que se ponga este casco. Y sea un trabajador minero más de Catavi. Creemos en Dios Padre Santo.
His first trip was to Mexico, a country he fell in love with immediately. His last trip was in August 2004, when he traveled to the Lourdes Shrine in the south of France. He died 8 months later. He asked for forgiveness. During the Jubilee in the year 2000, John Paul II asked for forgiveness for the Church's sins. From the Crusades, the Inquisition, divisions within the Church, the persecution of Jews, racism, and social injustice. He even personally forgave Ali Aka, the man who tried to kill him in St. Peter's Square on May 13, 1981. Accessible saints. John Paul II is also remembered for naming saints different cultures could relate to. During his pontificate, he beatified 1,340 people and canonized 483. That number alone is more than the combined canonizations carried out by his predecessors. Among the saints he proclaimed are parents like Gianna Beretta, indigenous people such as Juan Diego and Catherine Tecahuita, There's also the charismatic Padre Pio, the beatification of Mother Teresa, and Pope John the 23rd. Youth. His genuine attitude triggered an instant connection with young people. He suggested they gather together every 2 or 3 years, and that was the beginning of World Youth Day. The first meeting outside of Rome was in Buenos Aires, Argentina, back in 1987. It's from these gatherings that some of the most moving images of his pontificate were shown to the world. Dialogue with religions. John Paul II built bridges between everyone, even those who didn't share his point of view. He was the first pope to visit a synagogue and address the Jewish community as our older brothers.
Siete i nostri fratelli prediletti e in un certo modo si potrebbe dire i nostri fratelli maggiori.
He also visited a mosque in Syria where the tomb of St. John the Baptist is located. He also improved the church's relationship with Orthodox, Anglican, and Protestant Christians. He summoned the leaders of all world religions to pray together for peace. John Paul II has gone down in history for many reasons, and it's no wonder that many already call him John Paul II the Great.
Un joven de 83 años.
pope that quit. How do you call in for work and you work for Jesus? Yeah, Jesus, I'm not even gonna be able to make it today. No, Jesus, this 10:15 traffic, I was not expecting this, Jesus.
The Vatican has announced that Pope Benedict XVI will step down on February 28th, citing his old age. The 85-year-old will become the first head of the Catholic Church to resign from the post in nearly 6 centuries. Let's get more on this now from RT's Tom Barton, live in the studio for us here. Tom, he was only appointed in 2005. What on earth's going on? Why is resignation now?
Well, Kerry, yeah, a real shock. I think the small army of journalists and Pope watchers, as it were, in Rome, even they have been taken aback by this sudden announcement today. It should be noted that Pope Benedict XVI was one of the oldest popes to be elected when John Paul II died in 2005. However, he has said today, I do not have the mental and the physical strength anymore to continue my duties. I see that my job needs those qualities and I no longer have them, so I'm stepping down.
Now, his time at the Vatican has been marred by a string of scandals, hasn't it? I mean, tell us about that.
It has indeed. It's certainly been a difficult time. Pope Benedict said, was recorded to have said that he didn't really want the job of Pope, and what a time to have been in that position, fending off scandal after scandal that the Church has been, the Catholic Church has been mired in. Overarching them all, the child abuse sex scandal involving a number of priests around the Catholic Church, and he having to fend off that to try and bolster the reputation of the Church, which really took a battering because of that crisis. We've also got VatiLeaks. A lot of leaked information about power struggles and possible corruption inside the Vatican. The Vatican itself responding angrily to that, saying that the media was trying to play Dan Brown, the popular author who wrote the novel Angels and Demons, sort of insinuating that kind of thing going on inside the Vatican. And then we've got the Vatican Bank itself, allegations there that bank may be connected with dodgy bank accounts to the Italian mafia itself. So a really difficult period to be Pope. Pope Benedict II, the 16th, also trying to, as well as bolster that reputation, try and modernise the Church a bit, had his own Twitter account, got upwards of 1 million followers. However, big questions will be asked in the coming weeks as the new Pope is being chosen about who should lead the Church and about the future of the Catholic Church in this great time of troubles, as the outgoing Pope has said himself.
Big questions indeed. OK, Tom Barton, thanks a lot for that for now. Thank you.
Just saying, gotta be able to laugh. I joke with the church, but you gotta believe in something for real. You got to find something to believe in. Let me just say that. I can't tell you what to believe. I'll say I'm old-fashioned, I'm a dinosaur. I still believe that there's a God and that if you need him, you could call on him and he will help you just like he be helping me all the time. That's just my own personal opinion.